Good afternoon and welcome to our council meeting of Monday the 15th of August 2022. An audio recording of this meeting will be made for minute-taking purposes and it will last the length of the open meeting. The audio file will be available on the council website after the draft minutes have been circulated. I'd like to welcome our elected members. We have a request from Councillor Bronwyn Lewis for an extension to her leave of absence to include up until the 17th of August. Would somebody like to move that? Move Councillor Coomans. Second to Councillor Stewart. Any discussion relating to that? If not, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. I'd like to welcome our Chief Executive Officer Nigel Morris, our General Manager of Growth Matt Grant, our General Manager of Resources and Acting General Manager of Environment Elizabeth Williams, our Manager of Community Wellbeing Linda Schultz, Tanya Cregan, the Executive Assistant to the Mayor and elected members and the other staff who are here. I'd like to welcome the members of the gallery. It's good to see a full gallery. It's good to see people are interested. I'd like to welcome Georgina from the Southern Argus, Matt from the Victor Harbour Times and Brian from the Flurio Sun. And we also have South Coast Television here recording the meeting. I ask you all to please stand for the local government prayer. Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to grant Thy blessing upon the works of this council. Guide us in our deliberations for the advancement and the true welfare of the people of the district. The Alexandrina Council and its communities acknowledge the Narrandjeri people as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters of our council district. Thank you. Just remind elected members of your obligations under Section 74 of the Local Government Act of 1999 as it relates to conflicts of interest. Item 1 is the confirmation of the minutes of our meeting held on the 18th of July 2022. There are some corrections to the minutes that were sent out with the agenda, and Tanya's got them on the screen for you highlighted. It reported as 3 and it should have been 5 scenarios. So is there a mover for the minutes that we accept them? Councillor Ferrier, seconder, Councillor Maidment. Any discussion, questions? No. So I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. So item 2 is adjourned debate and 2.1 is adjourned debate relating to Lot 10 Langhorne Creek Road and the Strathalbyn Masterplan project. It was moved by Councillor Keeley and seconded by Councillor Gardner, who spoke to it in doing so. And so we resume where we left off. So is it any? Councillor Farrier.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to foreshadow a motion that if this one fails, that we adopt the revised recommendation on page 7 of 160.
تhank you. Is there any further discussion? There's not. I will put the recommendation of the adjourned recommendation. All those in favour? Yeah, this is the. You've got a four. So should this fail, we would go to the revised motion. So this is the recommendation that was originally moved. Yeah, so it's the one that highlighted there in front of you now. So those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 6. Against? Councillor Scott, for goodness sake. What?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I'm looking at 2 screens here. That motion there, the revised one, is what you're putting now or not?
No, for about the 3rd or 4th time, the one that's on the screen now that we're voting on is the original motion that was adjourned. The revised one is the one that would be put if this one is lost. So, let's start again. All those voting in favour? Against? So it's carried. So Councillor Farrier is calling a division. I should remind elected members that a division is a new vote. Would all those voting in the affirmative please stand? So we have Councillor Carter, Councillor Stewart, Councillor Keeley, Councillor Rebbeck, Councillor Maidment and Councillor Gardner. Thank you. Would those voting in the negative please stand? We have Councillor Farrier, Councillor Scott, Councillor Coomans and Councillor Bradford. It is carried. Thank you. So item 3 is presentations and deputations, and 3.1 is a deputation from Anne Bourne regarding the funding of a climate change officer. So Anne, would you like to come forward? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. To begin, I would like to acknowledge we're meeting, working and living on the traditional lands of the Ngurrindjeri people, and I pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging, to their ongoing stewardship and care of our country, and their profound knowledge and understanding of the interconnectedness of people, land and water. I'm here tonight to bring a community perspective to the motion that Councillor Rebbeck, one of the elected members on the Environment Advisory Panel, has put forward to this meeting, which you'll be familiar with from the agenda papers. The motion calls for budget savings accrued during the first quarter of the financial year to be allocated to the employment of a climate change officer and for an operational budget to be set aside to address this most serious issue of our times. This motion is very similar in content and intent to the motion that was put forward by the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee, I think at your May 15 meeting. It was fully and unanimously supported by the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee and the Environment Advisory Panel at that time. Because this was only coming to the agenda on Friday, I was able to contact Christine Trenorden from the Climate Committee, and members of the Climate Committee and the Environment Panel have been contacted. Some of them have replied and said they also fully support this motion, including Christine, Shen Mann and Claire Fuller. And I think, Ken, you would as well. Thank you. The agenda papers that you've received provide a comprehensive background and reasoning for this motion to be fully supported by you tonight. I have nothing to add to that information already provided, but do have identified some of the risks to Council of not supporting the motion and some questions for you to think about and hopefully respond to. I'm concerned that without this allocation of funds for an appropriate response to the climate crisis, that Alexandrina Council is placing itself and its community at risk by not fully understanding and addressing the seriousness of the global climate crisis, how it is impacting and will continue to affect us into the future. I'm deeply concerned that your previous lack of budget allocation and resources for adequate climate action undermines community trust in Council. Climate and environment are the priority issues identified in the A2040 consultation process, and both the Climate Committee and the Environment Panel have advocated strongly for additional staffing and resources in the past 2 budget cycles. Sadly, I have heard too many residents say, why bother to engage in consultation processes with Council? They don't listen and they don't take action on what we tell them. I'm sure you have a better understanding of your role and responsibilities as our elected members, and I believe that the Local Government Act requires you to listen to and respond appropriately to the concerns of your community. For those of you who are still uncertain, and I know some of you have been very supportive of these motions in the past, I have a few questions for you to think about. What additional information do you need to be able to appropriately address the issue of the climate crisis? Would it help if you had information about how other similar and different local government areas are responding? Would it make a difference if your ward constituents contacted you every time a climate or environment issue is put to the Council? We could set up a telephone tree to make sure that you're aware that these issues are of concern to a majority of your constituents, not just the Climate Committee and the Environment Panel, and the elected members who ultimately bring our motions forward to the Chamber. Would it help if the Climate Committee and Environment Panel members came to all council meetings as a show of support for these motions on behalf of the Climate Committee and the panel? Finally, and this is a very brief presentation tonight because I think you have a good understanding and information already, as the current chair of the Environment Advisory Panel, I'm asking you what is the point of an advisory panel if you're not going to take our advice seriously? What do we need to do differently to ensure that you understand and respond to the significant concerns we are working so hard to address? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anne. Any questions before you go? No? All good. Thank you very much. Thanks for that. Now, with your leave, I'd like to move to page 44, item 8.3. Everybody in favour of that? Anybody against it? Can we have a show of hands that I know whether you're for it or against it? Thank you. Thank you. That's good. Thanks. We'll move to 8.3 on page 44. So 8.3 is the draft climate change policy, public consultation outcomes, and there's a recommendation that be received and considered. Councillor Rebbeck, you moving that? You talking to it?
Yeah. Yes. I'd just like to thank we'll ask you to note the public consultation. The public consultation had overwhelming support from community in response to this climate change policy. 87% of our community support the policy. Of those that don't support it, I would suggest there's potentially some education that that comes along with the comments that were made. So I suggest that we've had the discussion around the policy before it went out. It's a robust policy. It can be amended to include other things as we go along. It is what we've come up with to date since the climate emergency declaration, but I really do strongly suggest that each and every one of us support this, considering the overwhelming response from our community in response to the policy. Thank you.
Councillor Gardner, you seconding it? Yes. Yeah. Speak. Yeah. Yeah.
This is incredibly important. We know it is. You only have to open your papers in the morning to understand what's happening around the world and on the east coast of Australia. We know ourselves the kind of devastation that drought brings. We've already experienced that. We haven't had a lot of rain in this area this year. July was a very dry month. We need to ensure that we provide adequate leadership to make sure that we're fully cognizant of how important climate change is and what we need to do. We know that from the Coastal Adaptation Plan. We've seen that. We understand that sea rise is already upon us, and we do need to act now.
Any further? Councillor Coomans.
Thanks, Mayor Park. I'm actually a member of the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee, and I certainly enjoy being part of that committee. I certainly enjoy working with the other members and staff. That committee's got one heck of a lot of expertise on it, and I certainly support this. The committee met 28th of July, considered all the public consultation. We had some good robust discussion on the inputs, and the committee unanimously recommends that council adopts this policy. I think it's a good policy. In terms of the support, there were a number who didn't support it. It was only a small number, but it was the usual argument about there's no evidence of climate change and things of that nature. And I think that climate change is real, and you know, we really need to work with it. So I'd certainly support this. And I should also mention that quite a number of the respondents, something like 65%, were actually in somewhat favour of if we had to use some of our rates in terms of in relation to the policy, then they would support that as well. So it was a good question to ask, that people were actually were prepared to put their hand in their pocket. So I'd support this. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councillor Rebbeck, do you want to provide a reply, or you're right?
Just briefly, I mean, the purpose of the policy, as it says, is to establish Council's position on climate change and embedded consideration of climate change risks and opportunities into Council's strategic decision-making processes and operations. The key to me is that we've got a position and we're looking at mitigating our carbon footprint throughout our entire community, which is fantastic. But once we endorse a policy, we do then need to think about the funding to implement it. Thank you.
Close the discussion, so I'll put the recommendation, which has 3 dot points. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. We move now, please, back to item 4, which is on page 8 of the agenda. Yep.
Sorry, Mayor Parks. I thought the deputation was to do with a climate change officer and funding for that, which is actually item 7.5. Were you considering that to be looked at in the normal course of the events?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I was asked to bring that particular item forward, which we did, and not to worry about the other one. Let it take its normal course. So, everybody back to page 8. So page 8, item 4 is petitions, and there are none. Item 5 is questions with notice. So 5.1 is a question from Councillor Scott regarding the events calendar and a collaboration with the City of Victor Harbor. 5.2 is a question from Councillor Scott regarding a proposed passing lane and associated earthworks leading into Strathalbyn. 5.3 is a question from Councillor Bradford regarding the removal of weeds on the Malang foreshore. 5.2 is from Councillor Coomans regarding public consultation responses as considered at the special council meeting on the 4th of July 2022. 5.5 is from Councillor Coomans, medium house values. 5.6 is from Councillor Farrier regarding the Fleurieu Regional Waste Authority asbestos issue. 5.7 is from Councillor Lewis regarding Sander Grove Road. 5.8 is from Councillor Lewis regarding the Goolwa Wharf development and the Oscar W. 5.9 is from Councillor Maidment regarding the former effluent ponds on the Cullington Road at Strathalbyn. 5.10 is from Councillor Lewis regarding ICLEI measures and reporting. 5.11 is from Councillor Lewis regarding commercial leases. 5.12 is from Councillor Lewis regarding the chart room leases and revenue. And the response to all those questions are in your agenda. So item 6 is questions without notice. Are there any questions without notice? Councillor Farrier.
Thank you, Your Worship. A question to administration. Some time ago, we were looking for a timed parking study in Strathalbyn. If I remember correctly, it was supposed to have been brought back before the Chamber last November. Can you tell me how that's progressing?
Through the chair, I'll have to take that one on notice. I'm unaware of that one.
Any further questions? Pardon, any further questions? Councillor Coomans.
Thanks, Mayor Park. I've got 3 questions, if I could. Later in the agenda, we're in relation to a code of conduct matter, which has cost this council more precious funds. Could I ask how many code of conducts under part 2 of the code are outstanding, and can they be presented during the caretaker period, or would they have to be deferred to afterwards? That's question 1.
Through the chair, I'm unaware of the exact number of outstanding ones, but as far as ones that have been finalised and presented to council, the 2 tonight are the final 2. As far as any additional code of conducts, the caretaker policy that's been adopted by council will not allow any code of conducts to be presented to the chamber.
My question 2 then is in relation to code of conducts, and I've asked this question before in terms of the amounts of funding that we've expended over the last 4 years on code of conducts. Could I ask for an update for perhaps the next meeting, or if you've got it now, in terms of what we're spending, and if there are some outstanding ones, are there some costs associated with those at this stage?
Through the chair, the amount that we've spent in the last 4 years, or this term of council, is approximately 150,000. There is some outstanding items which may incur additional costs, but those costs are unknown at this stage.
And the third one is in relation to Councillor Lewis' code of conduct items on this agenda. Did Councillor Lewis use funds under the council policy to engage a lawyer? I think there's something like $2,500 available per member to engage a lawyer. And if so, is that part of the 150?
Through the chair, Councillor Lewis has engaged a lawyer, but there has been no talk of costs at this stage, so that's not in that 150,000.
Just to clarify then, there's no accounts being submitted for that work?
Through the chair, not as yet, no.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Maidment.
Just following on from the questions I asked concerning the wastewater management plan, which was due for delivery in 2021, I don't think I got a definitive answer on that as to when the plan will be completed and when it will be presented to council. So I presume it'll be presented to the next term of council, but I'd really like to see that move forward as soon as possible. Because of the amount of expansion in Strathalbyn particularly, but in other areas of the council. So I think that should be a priority if you could see that gets done, please.
Yep, I'll take that on notice and get that for you. Any further questions? No, so we move on to item 7, which is notice of motions. There's a motion, 7.1. Is a notice of motion from Councillor Gardner regarding green organic waste services on Hindmarsh Island. It's moved by Councillor Gardner. Would you like to speak to it?
Yes, please, Your Worship. I wonder before I speak, we could just change that number up there. It's 13,377. Thank you. This motion is really important for the people of Mundu Channel, particularly Mundu Channel Drive, but also Goolwa Channel Drive, Sugars Beach, Chapel Road and Mills Road, Hindmarsh Island. I've had ever so many emails and conversations with people on this part of the island. They all live on small household blocks. They receive a waste bin, and they have received a yellow bin which is, of course, recycle, but they don't have green organics. And so all their green waste from their garden and their food scraps all go into their blue bin, which just heads off to waste. I've actually brought this to council on several occasions, once in November, and then again a report was brought to council in April. And unfortunately, while we knew how much it was going to cost, $13,377, a part of another motion was introduced, and the total cost for looking at food organics and green waste ballooned out to $45,000. It's the people on Hindmarsh Island in this area who are the ones who are desperately wanting the green bin waste so they can actually be more environmentally responsible. Other parts of our council area probably also want it, but generally speaking, these people are on bigger blocks of land and they have an opportunity to get rid of their green waste more adequately. So I am saying, please, will you support the people who are really wanting to be environmentally sound? They don't want to put their waste in the blue bin. They don't want it to go off to general waste. They want to be responsible. And I'm asking that in the first quarter budget review, that we will then ensure that these people are provided with green bin waste. Now, I know that there's going to be an initial set-up cost, and that will be $5,335. And there will be ongoing annual costs, like all of us who have green waste. It comes with a cost, and this will be about $8,000 each year added to the already burgeoning cost of FROA. But this is important. These are people who are really wanting this. So I'm asking you, please, to support it.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Stewart. Do you want to speak to it?
Thanks, Your Worship. Yes, as has been stated by Councillor Gardner, and I recall in briefings on this that there would legitimately be other areas that probably qualify for having this same shortfall, but because there's some problems in other areas, it's no reason not to start somewhere, and let's get this one fixed and we'll move on to them in due course.
Any further discussion? Sir Rebbeck.
I also support it because we do have, if the green waste is currently going to the blue bins, that's bin contamination, and that must have an impact on our wider waste and sorting and waste contamination, which is a huge problem. I do just want to use this opportunity to bring up the fact that we were supposed to look at and go out to public consultation on separating our waste costs from our rates, not separate, but having them as two separate invoices so that our community understand the cost of processing waste, and then that will hopefully be something that a potential new climate officer could support in the community is, well, how can we reduce our waste costs? And composting, for example, is an opportunity. But if some of us have got green bins and others don't, I think that's unfair, and these residents certainly need it. And hopefully by providing this, we can save costs elsewhere from waste contamination.
Any Councillor Scott?
Just a question, if I may. Why can't this food waste be composted in a little compost with it. It's not, we're not talking about high rise, we're talking about normal blocks of land. Why can't they like a lot of other people do, just compost it in the corner of the garden?
Any further questions or discussion? Councillor Gardner, do you wish to sum up? I'd right of reply.
Councillor Scott, I don't live in an ordinary piece of land anymore, but my husband and I lived for most of our married life on a normal household block. I couldn't have done without green waste bin. I simply could not have. So I was really, we were both reliant on our green waste bin, and I used it all the time. Okay, I had a worm farm, but I couldn't put all my waste in the worm farm, and I didn't have enough area to manage the waste. And like these people, they would like the opportunity. Why shouldn't they have a green waste bin?
That closes the discussion. I'll put the motion to you. All those in favour? Against? Against? That's carried unanimously. 7.2 is a motion from Councillor Gardner regarding the Wildlife Welfare Organisation. Would you like to speak to this one also? Yeah.
Yes, I would like to move this, Your Worship. The Wildlife Welfare Organisation has a rescue centre on Skews Road, and it resides on council land. It is the only wildlife rescue centre in South Australia of this kind. It's quite extraordinary. It looks after a whole range of birds, both species that belong to Australia, that are indigenous to this particular area, and in fact any bird that or animal, small animal, that people are concerned about or have run over or are damaged in some way, they can go to the Wildlife Welfare Rescue Centre. As you know, they came and spoke to us, and they were looking for a grant from this council. They told us that Victor Harbour Council had given them a grant both this year, 22-23, and in 23-24. So they're going to get 20,000 from Victor Harbour Council. And of course, the Wildlife Rescue Organisation building resides in Goolwa. So it looks after many, many animals and birds that are in trouble. It takes $70,000 a year to ensure this centre is operational, and there is only one person, the centre coordinator, who's a paid staff member, who is actually required to pay for or find funding to cover his wage. There are 2 second-hand shops, one in Goolwa in Hutchinson Street and one in Victor Harbour, and this is a very new one, but these are staffed 7 days a week by 45 volunteers. All that money goes towards the $70,000 that this centre is required to raise in order to run it in a very efficient way. But the fact is that they require $10,000 for a fence. And unfortunately, or fortunately, however you like to look at it, because endangered species are brought into the rescue centre, the Department of Environment and Water, who are very hot on how these animals are looked after, they are insisting that the organisation erect a security fence around the area, and the area is actually quite substantial. So this will cost $10,000, and the extra burden on the organisation is just too much, because the $70,000 simply will not cover this fence. So it's got no capacity in the budget to fund it. The $23,000 previously allocated in the 22-23 annual business plan and budget for Shannons car rally was identified as no longer being required at the 18th July meeting. And I'm suggesting that $10,000 be granted to the wildlife organisation for the Wildlife Rescue Centre fencing in the current year 22-23. This is really important. It's part of our environment, and we need to look after our environment more and more. We need to look after the birds and the animals, which are often damaged and needing help.
So do we have a seconder? Councillor Stewart? Did you wish to speak to it, or any discussion? Councillor Keeley?
I have a question. The wording of this motion suggests that a first quarter budget review would decide whether or not there was a surplus of 10,000. We're not actually saying that we're granting 10,000. The wording says that at the first quarter budget review. So what does that mean? Does that mean that if we've got 10,000 surplus, we can put it to this? If we haven't got 10,000 surplus, we don't do anything?
Through the Chair, what the motion is talking about is that at the first quarter budget review, we'll present to Council any changes in the budget. So it's already been identified that there's 23,000, which is no longer required for the Shannons rally. So what this motion is suggesting is, instead of giving back all 23,000, that 10,000 of that 23,000 be allocated towards the building of the fence. So what it's trying to say is that there's no additional funds that need to be adjusted in the budget. Some will come out and some will be put back in, but the net effect is we're not asking Council for additional funds.
Councillor Carter?
It's just a question. So, as the CEO has just said, if the budget comes in a worse state than expected, does that mean that these funds won't be expended?
Through the Chair, all adjustments will be presented to the quarterly budget review, favourable and unfavourable. We've already identified that one favourable result will be in there of 23,000. And what this motion is presenting is that $10,000 be extra spent. So it's not really one offsetting the other, but it's a case of we'll present all to it. It's just highlighting that we already know that we've got $23,000 that will need to be brought back because of the rally.
Councillor Farrier?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question. Currently, does Council support the Wildlife Welfare Organisation in any way, and what sort of dollar value does that equate to? It might be buildings, it might be reduction in rates, it might be a whole range of other things that I don't know. So I'm guessing what is Council's commitment to this organisation at this point in time as a dollar value?
Through the Chair, I don't know the exact dollar value, but I do know we support them. We also give them community grants, which they apply for on a yearly basis. They haven't applied for or been given a community grant this year, but I do also know that the value that we provide to them is not the value of Victor Harbour Council as identified by the motion.
Councillor Scott?
I guess the question, I'm just intrigued at $10,000 for a fence. Is that, it seems very high, not the height of the fence, but the cost. Has that been stipulated by the department that that's the sort of fence they have to have? And that's my first question or comment. There's another one to follow.
Through the chair, I have visited the site. I've seen the area that they need to cover. They've also made some initial inquiries into the $10,000. I think that that's a fair value for what they're asking for.
And is it right that the actual department has stipulated that they have to do that? If that's the case, I think it's a disgrace that a department like the Environment Department should impose that on a group that we hear is almost unique, and the incredible amount of work that they do should just come along and say, you've got to put up a fence, $10,000, and you can find the money. They should be at least supplying 50% of that money for that group to put up their fence. And I think we should, on their behalf, go to that department and say, come on, we need some money to do this. For us just to have to shell out when the department has waved their wand and said you can put up a fence is totally inappropriate. And until we've sought some money from the department, which is not much for a department of that size, I would not be in favour. And don't confuse, I'm not speaking against the Wildlife Organisation. I'm speaking against the procedure and the need to get some supported funding for this project.
Any further discussion? Councillor Bradford.
I'm also in favour of the organisation, but I've been thinking, like Councillor Scott, about whether there might be other alternatives in the environmental area, and so I'm wondering about whether the Landscape Board would have funds that they could contribute to something like this. But I don't know the answer to that, but whether they're worth approaching in the first instance before we make the decision to fund it from council funds.
Any further? I don't think the Landscape Board would pay for it because it's council-owned land. It's not government land. So, and they're not tending to finance re-veg programs on private property either at the moment. You've got to contribute to it. Councillor Scott, you've already spoken to it. A question?
May I foreshadow a motion if this motion fails?
No, you can't because you've spoken to it, so you can't foreshadow anything. Councillor Gardner, did you wish to sum up?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. One of the things that this organisation has struggles with is people telling them where they might be able to get a grant from. These people are really clever at finding money. They have, over the last 20 years, been able to erect this hospital. It's like a hospital. It has all sorts of humid cribs and all sorts of pieces of equipment which they've been able to raise themselves. The rescue centre itself was built by community members for free. They've had a huge amount of support from our local community. But in terms of grant funding, they have tried every venue that they possibly can. So I don't know about, I can't imagine in my wildest dreams that the Department of Environment and Water will give them $5,000. I think that's in your dreams, Councillor Scott. But I do know that they have done their very best to find the money, and really, in a sense, we're last resort.
That closes the discussion, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Anybody against? That's against, it's carried. So 7.3 is a motion from Councillor Scott regarding the right to farm. Did you wish to speak to that, Councillor Scott, and move it?
Yeah, bit bogged down on the wildlife. The right to farm. The reason for me bringing this up is that we've seen over the years, and it will probably increase, the influx of people living in on the edge of the farming community, farming land, and sometimes right in the middle of it if there have been blocks created or corners subdivided. And I guess I'm trying to get in front of what may occur in the future, that people move out there, they want the peace and quiet of the country, and then they find that a farmer's working all night doing hay baling because there's rain coming and he has to get it done, or there's a cow bellowing because it's lost its calf, as I had one the other day, couldn't find its calf. The calf was there fitting well, but it couldn't find it. Nevertheless, a lot of bellowing, and so they ring up and complain to the council and carry on. And I just think it would be prudent to have a clause in there that just defends the farmer's right to go about their business without people complaining about it, and for the public to appreciate the fact that they're in a farming community and these sorts of things happen. Maybe ploughing all night, they may be baling all night, they may be whatever, and you only have to have a mob of lambing ewes, and on a moonlit night those ewes will be bleating because their lambs nearly all night, and they walk their lambs through the night as well. So this is the reason for me moving it, and I hope that you'll support it. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Stewart? Any discussion? Councillor Farrier?
Thank you, Your Worship. Unfortunately, I can't support this motion as it is. I have sympathy for what Councillor Scott has said. Doing some research, this type of bill was brought by Robert Brokenshire back in 2009 to the government, and it failed. It got through the House of Legislative Council, but I understand it failed. It would appear the government have no appetite for this. It was based on an American right of the right to farm laws, and let me just give you a quick example of what they say. It says the right to farm laws in the United States deny nuisance lawsuits against farmers who use accepted and standard farming practices and have been in prior operation, even if, and this is the important part, even if these practices harm or bother adjacent property owners or the general public. Now, I sat in this chamber probably a year ago when there was a great debate about whether we should have canola, genetically modified canola. And to the best of my knowledge, the majority of the elected members around here were against it. It was a legal practice. They argued the fact of spray drifting onto their neighbour's property. They argued about organic certification. They argued about the spread of canola. And I won't go into all of the details, but suffice it to say that council, this is something that's going to be coming from council. Council should be neutral. We shouldn't actually turn around and set one set of ratepayers against another. We don't actually create laws that actually say farmers are right, they can do whatever they want. And for the rest, you get on with it. Now, everybody, it's a fundamental right of everybody to be able to complain. It's called democracy. And the day that you actually turn around and start putting in laws that one group of the community can just go ahead and do things, well, I think that's completely wrong. And I go back to the idea that council should be neutral and we shouldn't get involved. This is something that should be brought up by the organisations of farmers and lobbied at government level, not council level. So, thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Councillor Rebbeck?
I support this policy. I think things have changed and grown since Robert Brokenshire brought this motion to state government some 5-6 years ago, I'm not sure how long ago. The main reason is because of the land use planning. I think farmers can't go and do whatever they want. There's limits, within land use policy, chemical use, noise and odours, and doesn't mean that farmers can go and make noise and use chemicals. What it does is it protects farmers from operating in their normal business. And in some instances, farming has been shut down overnight when baling or harvesting needs to occur because people are worried about the noise. But the other thing that this does look at is the land use planning policy. And since the term of our council, we've lost numbers of blocks, significant land that used to be agriculture to development. And we keep doing it. And it's only those little bits by little bits, but we lose important farming land that will provide the sustenance and food for everybody going forward. And we need to make sure that is protected, and it makes it much more difficult. And one of the big issues is the fact that some farmers own more than one title, so they can sell off those titles as they like, but it means that those areas, farming land gets smaller and smaller, so we're left with what we've got. So I support it, and it's a letter to state government to have a rethink about that and protecting our farming land in South Australia.
Councillor Keeley.
Yes, I think as regards to this motion, I support Councillor Scott. We've made many mistakes over the years, and we started making them in 1834 when it was decided that the colony of South Australia should be established. And I can remember going to school, not in 1834, but some time ago, and the geography teacher saying the best grazing land is right where the city of Adelaide is. And, he said what a terrible thing it was. But of course now that all that plain is completely built on, and we're expanding out into the hills areas. And yes, we have made mistakes, and it's time now to reassess and make sure that we don't repeat those mistakes anymore. You've only got to have a look at the land now between Mount Barker and Wistow. A few years ago, a wag put a sign up there and said it won't be long before Mount Barker's here. Well, whoever it was right, it's there just about already. So where are we going to go? What land do we need to keep fresh and available for farming? And this goes some way towards looking at that, so I'm happy to support the motion.
Councillor Maidment.
Yes, I'm in favour of this motion, but I noticed with the officer's comments, should council wish to investigate this concept, it could be explored through ASART, and I'm thinking that before this letter goes off to the Minister, that ASART get a handle on what we should that letter should contain, and is that the way you envisage it going?
Councillor Coomans.
Yeah, I'll have my two bobs worth as well. I'm sort of in two minds on this one because, I'm a resident, I'm not a farmer, and I can sort of see both sides of the situation. But a good example to me was in another life, McLaren Vale, where the vineyards sort of bump up right up against residential properties. And when you pick grapes, you don't just work that between 9 and 5. You know, there's some very specific hours when you have to pick. And I know there were a number of complaints from neighbours about noises and lights and things like that. But, you know, those farmers had every right to be able to pick those grapes at the times that they needed to do it. But what I don't know is, you know, what this actually means. It's a letter to the state government, but what's it actually asking him to do in relation to what the rights would be, to what extent? You know, someone's mentioned about pesticides and spraying and smells, maybe dumping. What sort of things apply to that? But what I would like to see, and what Councillor Maidment has just said, and I was going to raise it anyway, is that maybe we should ask our ASART group to have a look at this before we pump up for that letter. And I'm just wondering the best way to do that is to defer this and subject to some input from the ASART group, and we might have some guidance from them in terms of what this should contain and what should happen with it. Thank you.
Councillor Carter. No, anybody else say? So Councillor Scott, do you have your right of reply?
Yeah, just very briefly, I just...
Was mine a motion?
Sorry, well, you sort of, if you were going to move a formal motion, you should have said, I wish to move a formal motion, but unfortunately you spoke up to it, and then you... Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Some of the things that have been mentioned are covered under separate legislation, particularly EPA, Environmental Protection legislation, spray drift and that sort of thing, odour and someone said something about dumping, I think, and all that's under the EPA. We've had all that around us at Middleton, and it's all been taken care of with the EPA. But yes, it could go. I would be quite happy for it, even if we altered the motion necessary, to just include that ASART be one of the first things ASART considers. Be quite happy for that if that will, you know, would satisfy those that have got some concern. But I just think it's not an invasive sort of a thing. We're not pitting, as was suggested, pitting one group against another. It's just identifying that there are farming practices that can go into sort of rather unfriendly hours, and they need to be done, and people need to recognise that. And there are signs and sounds that farming involved in farming and Councillor Kerman's raised a very good one that I'd overlooked, was picking grapes at night. But I still seek your support for this. I think it's got merit, and we are a farming area, and we need to support the farming community.
The ASART component's really covered in the officer's comments, so it's part of that in the dialogue in there, so that closes the discussion. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. We go to 7.4, which is from Councillor Scott regarding affordable housing. Do you wish to move it and speak to it?
I think homelessness was something that we sort of didn't really think about much, and hoped that it would go away. I've been in council for 8 years, and I think homelessness is becoming worse, not better. There has been good work done by the Fleurieu Foundation, donations from groups like Rotary to help the homeless, lots of committee meetings. But I suggest that one of the simplest way of helping to get rid of or reduce the homelessness is actually build a few houses. Council owns a lot of land, a lot of building blocks, And I'm suggesting that in the future, that we look, and I'm asking the staff, as you see there, to research the options that are open to us to build houses on council land. If we don't like them, we can always sell them off, and our asset has increased because we put a house on it. But you could put a duplex on a block, and that would service particularly the high risk echelon, which are, I'm told, sort of women in their 60s. And by suggesting this, the proposal and the report will be waiting for the new council. We can't do anything now, but it'll be something there for the new council. If I'm not there myself, then others will be able to evaluate it and then make some preparation in the face of the budget, take it on its merits. But I just thought it's a very good idea to get this going and have it ready for the new council.
So do we have a seconder? Councillor Bradford. Any discussion? Councillor Bradford, you speak first. Go on.
So there has been a lot of work going on in the community around homelessness and affordable housing, quite a lot of discussion and a lot of research, but it would be really fantastic for council to be able to put some support behind that. Certainly the Growing Life Connections program is finding that there is lots of needs out there, helping to find people a roof over their head and furniture and the things that they need for a whole variety of reasons, whether that's domestic violence or they just simply can't get into a rental property because there's nothing available. Caravan parks and motels have been, taking in people to get them out of the weather and into some shelter. So I really think that this is one of the biggest issues confronting us socially over the next few years, and it would be great if council could do some of that background work for the community.
Councillor Maidment.
Yes, I attended the homelessness forum last week that the Florio Foundation ran, along with Councillor Keeley. There are 250 people homeless on the south coast. That was their data. The state government's answer to affordable housing is that developers now have to provide blocks of land for affordable housing. So these blocks are coming in at 250 square metres and 300. So you can imagine those sorts of blocks in new developments at Strath. You're still going to pay a lot of money for those blocks of land, well over $100,000 for them, and then you've got to put a small house on it. So that's not the answer to affordable housing. The answer would be for vacant council-owned blocks of land, as Councillor Scott alluded to, and we get into the housing market for emergency housing particularly. And I'm aware of the amount of space taken up by emergency, people needing emergency housing in caravan parks, because I'm the overseer of the Strathalbyn caravan park, and we have lots of people coming in and homeless, and that's their last resort. And we provide cabin accommodation in emergency situations for the agencies that Councillor Bradford alluded to. So 10 years ago, there wouldn't have been one homeless person in Strathalbyn, but now you'd probably find there'd be about 20. So but they mainly congregate to the south coast where they can hide a lot down here.
Any further discussion? They can always do something with Kalimna that's sitting there empty. The only reason they didn't use it for a hospital for elderly people was because of getting in and out. More the people that they could put in there would be quite ably bodied. They just need somewhere to sleep and live. And I don't know what happened to the old police station house in Strathalbyn, that was empty for donkey's years. the government owns houses all over the place that they could put people into, even if it's only for 24, 48 hours till they get them settled. But it's, to have Kalimna empty is disgusting when there's nothing wrong with it. Councillor Scott, did you wish to close the debate?
I think it's all been said. I think we know the need is there, and this is a way of just starting. It's no commitment for council at this stage, but it'll be there for the new council. And I think I'd really hope that you'd support this too. Thank you.
Close the debate. I will put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. 7.5 is a motion from Councillor Rebbeck regarding funding of a climate change officer. It's moved. Councillor Rebbeck, do you want to speak to it?
Thank you. I'm going to try to avoid the emotive side of this. We've had so many discussions around the importance of the climate emergency. I guess a declaration of an emergency that we did back in December 2019 doesn't mean we've really done anything about climate change until we act on it. As of now, there's 27 European countries, 41 sub-national governments, plus more than 2,000 cities and councils across the globe that have declared a climate emergency, covering more than 1 billion citizens. But how many of those are actually acting on it and doing something about it is much, much less. We've had a wonderful dedication of volunteers, staff, advisors and elected members to get us to where we are with our climate change policy, but it has taken 3 years to get to that. The word emergency means urgent, and since that 2019 declaration, we've seen horrific wildfires across Australia, and more recently we've had 25,000 people in Australia displaced by floods, to name a few. There'll be no point in the climate policy that we've just endorsed unless we allocate the funds to implement it. It's crunch time. We need to provide the funds for this to be implemented. It's something that we've advocated for since we had the emergency declaration in 2019. 87% of our community now support this policy, and our community have time and time again reiterated how important this is to them through the A2040, through community consultation, through the village conversations. It comes up the top of the list time and time again. Environmental Advisory Panel endorsed this. A climate panel have endorsed this. I know the big question to you as elected members is, well, how do we fund it? One of our very own motions, the solar energy efficiency project, which is to reduce emissions, has saved $65,000 to date. But that funding has been used elsewhere for other initiatives, yet environmental initiatives are the most underfunded in our entire council, and we've only allocated $30,000 to date to the climate policy. So we have $65,000 in savings through that energy efficiency program, and I suggest that we need that and we reallocate it to this, and we prioritise, the word prioritise is in there, any identified savings from the first quarterly budget review. If it doesn't come up then, the next budget review. I have had discussions with some administration, and I understand that Nigel is committed to finding some savings within our budget to be able to endorse this policy, that our community endorse this climate change officer and the operational funds needed for something that our community and so many of us have worked so hard on getting to this point. So please, please endorse this motion. Thank you.
We have a seconder, Councillor Coomans.
Thanks, Mayor Park. Yes, I'm happy to support this. When the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee sat one of the recommendations, or a couple of recommendations that came from the meetings, was that councillors really should consider a climate change officer who would be responsible for implementation of the carbon neutral plan, and also a climate engagement officer who would be responsible for resident education and engagement. And it also sought a sum of some $200,000 to drive the change. When it came to the budget deliberations, that wasn't successful, but I recall asking the CEO at the time if there was some way of this happening, and he did mention at the time that he was looking at some organisational restructuring, organising, which may well release a position that could fulfil this requirement. We haven't had a response back on that yet, and I'm loath to sort of ask him the question whereabouts he is with this, but I think we need to move. We really do need to move on this. It's been years since we've made that declaration, and as Councillor Rebbeck has said, the community thinks this is pretty important. The advisory committee reckon this is pretty important, and the only thing is that $50,000, I'm not quite sure how much that's going to allow effort to be used, but we've got to start, and we need to start now, and we need to get some people in place to make this happen. We've got a couple of committees that are working: the Environment Committee, the Advisory Committee, Climate Emergency Advisory Committee. We're all trying to get on board with getting some action happening, and I think it starts with there are consequences of making that declaration, and the obligations on this council are to do something, and let's do it.
Any further discussion? Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Your Worship. Yes, I was going to say that so often in this chamber we almost achieve greatness, as a lot of our managers would know, but we usually just miss it by that much. We don't go far enough, and we really need to hit this hard, and we need this officer, and I hope that the whole chamber supports this.
Any further discussion? Councillor Scott.
You've probably heard me say this before, and I'll say it again. I'm afraid I am very frustrated with the whole approach to the climate change. I certainly don't disagree with what has been said by the others, my fellow councillors, at all. But I just think there's such an opportunity missed by not collaborating. Here we are trying to scratch together some money. We only have to put $50,000 on the table, and the other 6 councils that are in Southern and Hills, and we'd have the money to have a climate officer, an assistant, and a car, and an office, and everything. And yet here we are trying to go it alone. And as I say, once you get halfway up Hayborough Hill, where my ward ends, or the council ends, you suddenly get into Victor Harbour. And, well, you're still going to have emissions there. Why on earth don't we all get together and attack this whole thing sensibly and collaboratively and efficiently? This is ratepayers' money that we're dealing with here, and I know they are prepared for it to be spent, but why don't we get the maximum bang for our buck? It's not as if it's just an Alexandrina problem and no one else is affected. It's the whole of the world. So why on earth don't we get together and we've got these structures. What is it? Resilient Hills and Coasts that have done quite a lot of work. And they are apparently an offshoot of the Southern and Hills councils, I believe. I'm not too sure there, but anyway. For the life of me, I cannot understand why there isn't, and it should be driven from above, not necessarily from down here. The opportunity should have been made available to us, for us all to get together. If you don't, I mean, we've got smaller councils and bigger councils, so you could have a pro rata sort of contribution. but and we would get so much further down the road if we collaborated rather than each one putting in a little bit of money and getting a kilometre down the road with the thing, instead of all getting together and hopping on a bus and travelling way down the road and being really efficient in the whole area. As well as that, I just wonder how much we're expected to do while people are going around building houses and putting black roofs on them, not using any gumption at all, that they take 20% more energy to cool a hot black roofed house. And yet I've just come down from Roseworthy the other day, and the new subdivision, mind you, on farming land, but we're not supposed to build on the food production area at all. But nevertheless, there's a subdivision going up north of Roseworthy. Most of them got black roofs or charcoal roofs. Well, how smart's that? And yet we're supposed to commit ratepayers' money to try and teach people to not do that sort of thing. So I just think I'm not against I'm not against climate change at all. I fully understand all that, or have some understanding of it. So I'm not arguing against it, but I just think we need efficiencies, we want to be really smart, and we want to get way down the road with what we're doing. So that's where I'm coming from, but I commend the speakers and what was said earlier and all that, fully appreciate. But I just think there's an opportunity to be really smart with this, and I don't think we are being as smart as we could be.
Any further discussion? Councillor Gardner.
I concur with Councillor Scott, but isn't it better to start small? We've got people, councils on all around South Australia that are nowhere near ready to do what we are. So I would rather start small. We'll get smarter later on, but better to start now and not leave it till later.
Any further discussion? Rebbeck, do you wish to close the debate?
These debates have come up all around the world about, well, you know, we do it, but what about them? Why don't we do it collectively? What about federal government? What about state government? What about this? State government does have a climate change policy, and we are actually we're the leading state in terms of what we do for carbon drawdown. But this policy is about the opportunities for our council region. And we are very, very fortunate in our region to have volunteers and community members that are really willing to do something about it individually and collectively. And I was extraordinarily heartened to see some of the amazing ideas that came out of our community in that when the policy went out for community consultation. Supporting renewable energy solutions, community battery, energy hubs, restoring biodiversity, reducing clearing, increasing plantings and community gardens, reducing waste and increasing recycling, community education, promoting energy efficient housing, increasing electric vehicles, subsidies and rate rebates, circular economy, improving bike routes. All of those things come under this hub of what a climate change officer could do and could improve our council region and our opportunities for our council region. There's other councils that have done things like put up one wind farm, one wind thing, and that paid itself off within 3 years and provided enough energy for electricity for not just their council but other councils. We could do something like that and then monetise our council and provide huge opportunities for income. There is a huge emerging opportunity in the carbon trading space that we haven't even tapped into, that is an enormous opportunity for council to generate revenue and in fact reduce our rates. So we need to lead by example, and we're doing that with our policy, and we can do that and lead by example for the Southern Hills to look at what they can adopt across a range of councils and what other neighbouring councils can adopt as well. So thank you very much, and I really look forward to you all hopefully supporting this motion.
Closes the discussion. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. 7.6 is a motion from Councillor Maidment regarding the extension to the operating hours or the season at the Strathalbyn swimming pool. And Councillor Maidment, you wish to speak to it?
So this goes back to the 19th of April 2021 when we were petitioned by, I think it was well over a couple of hundred people that they were seeking to have the Strathalbyn Community Pool season extended to 10 months per year. It went to a council meeting on the 19th of April. We noted the petition and we asked for a report to be brought back, which came back 4 months later in August. And a lot of discussion around the extension of operating hours as part of the budget. But one thing that came out of that discussion in August was that council consider options to enclose the pool as part of their budget deliberations for 2022-23, as well as considering extension of the operating hours. Now, I appreciate we've got a report on all of that. And back in June of this year, 2022, all we considered there was that we didn't consider any of the extension to the season at all in that particular motion. It was all around a sport and recreation strategy and facility development plan, which was fine, that's fantastic. And so I've been asked by the petitioners to seek a definitive answer as to whether or not the Strathalbyn Community Swimming Pool season can be extended to 10 months. If they can't get that, there could be a compromise somewhere there. For this to be given serious consideration at the next quarterly budget review, that was their words. Once they get that answer, they will be quite happy with whatever this chamber decides.
A seconder, Councillor Keeley, you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Maidment and I have met a few occasions with the people that are very keen swimmers in the Strathalbyn pool, and it gets quite a lot of use. The pool, which we have a joint sponsorship with at Victor Harbour, is really too far away, and especially for young swimmers who are wanting to improve their style, they've got quite a drive after school, and then it's late night by the time they get home. So they're very keen to have the pool open a longer time. So I'm very happy to support Councillor Maidment's motion. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councillor Farrier.
Question, if I may, Your Worship. In the officers' comments, they talk about the operating costs for the 6 month season to be $300,000. Now, this is in the summer, $300,000. Why then is in the winter, the colder months, for 4 months, only $101,000? The numbers don't quite add up somehow. That we can do swimming for 6 months in the summer period where we're not using a lot of gas for $300,000, but to extend it for 4 months in the colder time, it only costs $101,000. Something doesn't quite add up.
Any further discussion or questions? Not for me. I can tell you there are people from Goolwa that drive to Strath to swim in that pool because it's a 50-metre pool, and they get very upset when it's closed, even though it is winter. Do you want to answer that?
Through the chair, I haven't got an exact answer for you, but I can presume that it's also because during those extra 4 months, we're not expecting the crowds. We're not talking about heating it any longer or covering it. It's just an extension of 4 months, but I can't tell you why the difference between 100,000 for 4 months and 300,000 for 6 months it is.
Councillor Coomans.
Yeah, I guess I just question that you know, it is 300,000 through the summer, 100 for the extra 4 months. It's 20 people, according to the report, that would be using it. The plant room can't cope with it in the winter time, and the current hours are actually consistent with what other pools' opening times are. So I'm not sure why. Look, I don't think I can support this because even on environmental grounds, I think this is a negative.
Through the chair, with the 6 months, it's also going to be offset by the income for the 6 months, to the 300,000, the 100,000 for the additional 4 months.
Sorry? Okay.
Councillor Parry, you've only asked a question, but if you wish to speak, just let me know, that's all. Yep. Anything else? Anybody questions for Councillor Maidment?
So it's my understanding the extra 101,000, the pool would not be open all day, it'd only be open in the morning, so they'd put the covers on the pool and that would retain some heat, obviously. So it's not open as long during the day as it would over the summer months, so you wouldn't get any afternoon swimming. It would only be the morning for the lap swimmers and anyone that was seeking to rehabilitate for whatever injuries they might have, and you'd have the swimming club would utilise it in those early hours of the morning as well. So it would be, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the people that put this petition up, there'd be more than 20 using it in the morning, because you'd have swimmers that are training would use it, who don't currently use it at the moment because it's not open.
Close the discussion. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried. We've got item 8, which is reports of the administration. 8.1 is the South Australian Wooden Boat Festival minutes of the 26th of April 2022 and the 25th of July 2022, and there's a recommendation that those minutes be received. Moved Councillor Gardner, seconded Councillor Rebbeck. Any questions or discussion? If not, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. 8.2. I beg your pardon, Councillor?
Could I ask the CEO to speak into the microphone? It's difficult to hear him through here.
Okay.
Thank you.
8.2 is the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee minutes of the 5th of July 2022 and the 28th of July 2022. There's a recommendation that they be received. Moved Councillor Maidment, seconded Councillor Keeley. Any discussion? Questions? No. Councillor Coomans.
Look, just a quick comment, and it will probably be part of the next meeting, but Dr. Ken Fisher and Claire Fuller made a presentation to staff on the 4th of August, and I think it was very well received. So, thank you.
Is any further discussion? I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. 8.3 is the draft climate change policy that we've done. 8.4 is the draft coastal adaptation plan. There's a recommendation there with 2 dot points. Is there a mover for those? Moved Councillor Gardner, seconded Councillor Rebbeck. Any discussion or questions to that? If not, Councillor Rebbeck.
Oh, look, I just wanted to point out the great work that's done in this. There's not a lot of adaptation plans that have been endorsed, and I think that it's absolutely essential, and it's a really comprehensive report, and it's so well done to those involved, and yeah, well done, Monica, as well.
Any discussion? Anybody else? Councillor Coomans.
Yeah, I echo those comments made by Councillor Rebbeck. I guess one of the things that I have difficulty with is when we talk about adaptation and mitigation, and I just wanted to give members an example of what that actually means. And a great example is like a boat that's got a hole in the side. Adaptation is you man the pumps, and mitigation is you plug the hole. And this one is the man the pumps, because we can't mitigate against this coastal happenings.
Any further discussion? There are some mitigation works in that plan, down around Mundu. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. 8.5 is the public place recycling trial at Port Elliot. There's a recommendation there with 3 dot points. Is there a mover for that? Move Councillor Rebbeck. Seconder. Councillor Carter. Any discussion? Councillor Farrier.
Thank you, Your Worship. A question, if I may. Reading through this item, it raised the question of why is this cost of $15,000 for a 6-week trial for 2 locations, and yet for $13,377 we can do the additional components of Hindmarsh Island for a whole year.
But it's for 6 months, not 6 weeks.
6 weeks, if I remember correctly, it was said in... Sorry?
Bottom of page 59, it's a 6-month trial period.
Sorry?
At the bottom of page 59, you have the last sentence says at Port Elliot, it's for a 6-month trial period, inclusive of the holiday periods.
It says, refer attachments 8.5 on 62. Additional yellow lead recycle bins to be trialled in Horseshoe Bay area, 10 bins at 4 locations across a 6-week summer period.
Okay, through the Chair, yes, it is 6 weeks for the trial, and the costs are associated with auditing and bin audits associated with that. So that's a heavy cost of the trial, obviously, including pickups, obviously signage. There was a bunch of costs that went into that are quite unique to a trial. Obviously, that's why the higher cost compared to an established logistics exercise when you're talking about green waste.
Thanks, Gary. Councillor Coomans.
Look, I've just got some questions about this. And one of the things that's come up is community groups like Scouts who are trying to use this to raise some money. Is there some way that we can actually assist them a bit more so that, we identify some bins or something that's for deposit collections, the 10-cent deposit collections, so that they can actually use it to raise some funds?
Through the Chair, absolutely. I guess the predominant cost with this is the association with adding yellow or green bins, depending on what the final scope decided, to a public domain. The actual 10-cent recycling and the work with the community was very positive. Those costs, I imagine, would be very, very low, if anything. So I think that can still be something that we pursue as administration.
And I guess the other one is that I know some consortium of other councils are actually working together to, when a contaminated bin is picked up by the trucks, it all goes to a central location where there's some amount of sorting, so they can actually pull out the recyclable material, the cans and bottles and things like that, and actually make it useful, rather than saying, well, this is contaminated, it's got a bit of landfill in it, so the whole lot's now going to landfill. Is some thought being given to maybe that we might try something like that as well?
Through the Chair, not through this process, but I guess to answer it indirectly as well, one of the biggest challenges with this type of project or domain is the waste volumes you're dealing with. So as an environmentalist, it's hard to actually deal with, but the environmental cost of moving trucks around for the volume gain in waste and recycling is often a net zero impact to the environment. So that's why this type of venture is quite challenging.
Any further discussion? Councillor Rebbeck.
Well, this should probably close this debate because I moved it, but I just think before we put on under other individual waste management options, which I think is really important, we do need to look at that whole of council, review on how we manage waste. And again, I bring up the fact that one of those options is to separate out the waste levy from the actual levy of our rates, because the waste is a significant cost to our ratepayers, and if we can understand that, we can look at how we better manage that. But it's essential, and now that we have our climate officer funded, it's potentially something as well that they can work in conjunction with the Waste Authority. Definitely not against it, where there's so much more improvement that needs to happen right across our council in terms of how, it's not in terms of how we manage waste, it's in terms of what the people, the visitors and the residents do with their waste. And so there's different things here, and I think it's to think about it from that perspective as well.
So that closes the discussion, so I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? Against? That's carried unanimously. Well, good. I have difficulty sometimes because everybody's up and down all over the place. So if you sit up here, you'll know the challenge. So you're against it, so it's carried. 8.6 is the Shannons Adelaide Rally. Road closures on Sunday the 27th of November 2022. There's a recommendation there with several dot points. Several dot points. Then there's one, but they're not all numbered. So is there a mover for that? Move Councillor Keeley. Seconded Councillor Maidment. Any discussion? Councillor Scott.
Yes, in the earlier discussions with this, I thought that it was going to be purely around Strathalbyn. I always have some resistance to closing off main arterial roads, and as I understand it, I think Henry Martin Road's just out of Ashbourne, from memory, and it goes right through to the Paris Creek turnoff, so I guess that's, you might say, the whole of Bulls Creek Road, and that concerns me. However, I find it extraordinary that that no one's responded to any of the advice of the road closure. I'm not doubting what the staff have done, but I just find it extraordinary that no one out of 40, I think it's 41 people, did not respond to the fact that their road was going to be closed and they would be stuck at home for the day. So, I personally would, I suppose it will paralyse the whole event if we take Bulls Creek out of it. And if people haven't reacted to it and complained, then I guess it's not for me to deny the race the opportunity of racing, but I just think that it's an arterial road, and for that to be suddenly blocked off on a busy day is inappropriate. But then I believe that arterial road should be open for all road use. I've always felt that, and my opinion hasn't changed.
Any further discussion? Councillor Farrier.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question, if I may. In the body of this motion, it says that an application has been made to Council by Massive Events Corporation and appointed subcontractors Seychelles. Does that Council have appointed Seychelles? In which case, I can't see anywhere within this motion or analysis of what the cost to council is.
Through the chair, the cost to council is only going to be advertising the road closures, so the costs are minimal. We've said before that we'll be able to deal with that under our existing operating budget. We didn't subcontract Seychelles Massive Events Corp did.
Any further discussion? Councillor Maidment.
Yes, 47 people directly affected were contacted via mail. No responses were received. So obviously they're happy with the arrangements. As mentioned, Seychelles Traffic Management, they will have monitors at all key intersections with those particular roads. It's a Sunday and it's not a very busy day for residents. Basically, they won't mind staying home, perhaps. I don't know. It's no different to Tour Down Under. You wouldn't begrudge them coming through your area. I know they have gone past Councillor Scott's place at times and maybe inconvenienced him for a short time, but this is a big event. They say, you know, in excess of 300 cars. And yes, originally they wanted to contain it all at Strathalbyn, but they have to get there, so they'll be driving to Strathalbyn and they have to use those particular roads mentioned. So I hope you all vote for this particular motion.
Any further discussion? Councillor Keeley, you want to close the debate?
Yes, I'd encourage everybody to approve this. I live on Old Bull Creek Road. Doesn't mean we're any older there, but these roads have been closed off before and everybody survived. And it brings a great deal of excitement to Strathalbyn. We're certainly becoming now, you know, classic and vintage car mecca to the Strathalbyn Motor Museum, collectible classics. This puts some very lovely and exciting cars into Strathalbyn for 4 hours, and it'll attract people there. They'll buy lunch, they'll wander around, look in some of the shops and enjoy the cars. And it's just another attraction to Strathalbyn, and I'd ask you all to support it. I think it's a very good event, and now that it's not costing us $23,500, we're able to use that money for other things. So this is, I think, a very good outcome. Thank you.
Close the discussion, so I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. 8.7 is the Goolwa Oval Recreation Precinct Project Stage 2 Prudential Report. Move recommendation that Council receives and notes the report. Moved Councillor Carter. Seconded Councillor Gardner. Any discussion? No, get on with it. That's good. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. .8 is the Goolwa Oval Recreational Precinct Master Plan Stage 2 update, and there's a recommendation that we approve the master plan as presented for Stage 2. Moved Councillor Carter. Seconded Councillor Gardner. Any discussion? Councillor Scott.
Just very quickly, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a fair bit of reading involved, but I get the impression that you cannot drive right round the oval. And I think that the officers' comments were that from a safety point of view, and that with children and everything, I appreciate that. However, I'm just wondering about the traffic management point of view. I mean, if you reduce people to 5 kilometres an hour, then probably the children are relatively safe. But having cars that go right round and then having to double back and come out, is that a potential problem or not? Just a question.
Leo, I think you can drive around it from my memory.
Yes, so the absence of a circular formation around the oval is part of the contemporary design for the space. There will be ample signage throughout the oval itself to illustrate the directions and things. And there'll be, you can drive around from a disability perspective to access specific parking for those natures. But no, there's no circular loop around the space itself, and that is predominantly for a safety aspect, because there's children of all ages there. There's a new playground going in, and that was there for that reason, to avoid that potential.
Any further discussion? Councillor Farrier.
Once again, a question, Your Worship. In the Dean Newbury report, and I understand this relates to 8.8, which is the Masterplan stage up to, stage 2 update. At 2.1.17, they say, at the time of preparing this report, Council is yet to receive payment of any grant funding. And in the next line, they turn around and they say that Council is therefore, let's have a look. Stage 1 Council is therefore planning to fund the entire construction works of Stage 2 from the expected $5 million of grants. Does that cause us any problems, the fact that we don't have any money, or it's just going to come out of our own bank account?
So, okay, to answer that question, it's just a particular way of wording that sentence. So the way the process works with the grant funding is we have to actually send an invoice to the grant body, and that invoice was generated a few days ago. It's with them at the moment. So we'll shortly be receiving payments of $2 million of the grant funding into the council account. The expenditure to date's been negligible in comparison to the $4.5 million to be expended.
They also say at 2.2.4, Council has not, at the time of preparing this report, presented a detailed analysis of the estimates of the whole of life costs. Does that causes any problems?
Of course, this is referring to potential reports, and I'm here to talk about the whole master plan, but I'm sure somebody else can get back to you.
We're signing off on the master plan, so
I'm sorry, I can't answer the whole of life costs.
And finally, it says that we haven't done a development application for the project. Once again,
that's at the time of writing the report. That development application has been lodged and has been approved. Yeah. Yes.
Any further discussion? So I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously.
Thank you.
8.9 is the Pathways Prioritisation Guidelines, and there's a recommendation there that we approve the guidelines as provided in your attachment. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Stewart. Seconder, Councillor Maidment. Is there any discussion? Councillor Coomans.
Thanks, Mayor Parkes. Look, in principle, I support this. It is a guideline, but I know one example in my own area where the community's been pushing for it since I moved to the place, and a community survey was held, and the local community association has also asked for it, and council's actually funded it this year, so I'm assuming it will continue on. But when you do the numbers to it, it doesn't quite hit the high mark. So I'm thinking that this is a guideline, and every guideline, sometimes there are exceptions, and maybe that's probably an example of, if it comes up in the future, there could be an exception. But in general, I think we've been waiting for this for some time, and I think it ticks most of the boxes.
Any further discussion? I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. 8.10 is the South Australian Wood and Boat Festival of 2023, and it's a recommendation that we approve the updated plan. Moved Councillor Carter. Seconded Councillor Stewart. Is any discussion? No. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. 8.11 is the draft CATS bylaw, outcomes of the consultation. There's a recommendation with 1 and 2, or an option 1 or an option 2. So we just need to know if somebody's moving on what they're moving. Councillor Rebbeck?
Yes, I would like to move the motion with option 1, but make an amendment to part 4, which I have emailed through to administration. But I can read that if you like. Have you got it there, or can you flick it up on the screen? I did. Just bear with me, I'll find it. So the amendment would, oh, you've got it up there. Upon approval of this CATS bylaw by Parliament, administration explore and recommend options for funding its implementation and education, including the edema safe pet being trialled by LGA, funding via registration fees, and a review of successful implementations at other councils. I'd like to speak to that now that I've moved it, if possible.
I just want to find out what you're moving, because you said option 1.
So
that's not option 1. Or option 2. So that's part of option 2.
Okay, so I'm moving. Get back to it. I'm moving recommendation 1, 2, and 2 with option 1, and then it's not. I thought then 2, 3, and 4, but amended.
So we're moving all that. Okay. Okay, so moving option 1. Sorry, so I'm a bit confused then. So if we move option 1, we don't need to do 2, 3, or 4, is that right?
Through the chair, you had option 1 and option 2, so the crossed out bit is option 2 there, so that's correct. So now you're going to be moving option 1, option 2. Sorry, let me start it again. 1, that the report be received. 2, in exercise of the powers, you're going to be then moving option 1. We take out option 2, like shown on the screen there, and then I get the authorisation in 2 there, and we move up further. 3 stays the same as what it was before, and you're moving a different option 4, which talks about the timing of that budget.
Yes, correct. Okay. So if I might talk to that, there's been a significant amount of work on this CAT bylaw, and it went out for community consultation, and over 80% of our community support this CAT bylaw. And so it will take some time for that CAT bylaw then to go through Parliament, which is likely to be in January. And then from there, we need to figure out how it will be funded and implemented. There has been significant work done by John Reid on funding these bylaws, and he's got a process called the edema safe pet, which is being trialled by the councils, and that allows cats to be blue-chipped, Bluetoothed, and the biggest cost for councils with implementing these is actually finding cats that aren't within locatable distance from their homes, and these Bluetooth allow that to occur. So that's an option, but also to look at, as he says and advocates for, is that it just needs to be adequately funded with funds similar to what dog registrations are, and that should be able to also support the CAT bylaw to be implemented. And so to ensure that we look at what's worked and what's not worked with funding these going forward, it needs to have a proper review. But the main thing to consider for today is actually getting that bylaw through, which has had the adequate public consultation and has overwhelming support from our community.
So do we have a seconder? Councillor Scott. Do we have any further discussion? Councillor Coomans.
when this was first proposed, I opposed it, and I still oppose it, because I don't think this is going to fix the cat problem at all. I used to have a cat that was free to roam, and it certainly did so, and quite often it would bring a field mouse home. It was very territorial, and it ensured that no other cat, indeed dog, came onto our property. When it died, we got another cat and decided to keep it confined. Within a few months, we noticed tunnels and diggings in the backyard, and someone said it was rats. So we also noticed other cats, maybe feral, also invading our property. So I bought some rat poison to get rid of the rats. But unfortunately, I think besides killing the rodents, it will most probably take out a bit of wildlife as well. So it's demonstrated to me that trying to keep cats contained and contained at all times is not going to work. I think the other thing that, if we were going to do a community survey, and it says here 80% of the 115 support the introduction, but we didn't ask them about whether they actually owned a cat and how many, because that might have given us some indication of the sort of respondents that were responding to this. We also didn't ask them about were they prepared to pay registration fees, because at the moment all ratepayers are going to have to contribute towards the cost. And the figures in the report talk about $150,000 to set it up, and then $100,000 per year, less what we might get in registration fees. But the report also says we'll never meet what the costs are, and it's very similar with the dog registration. It costs all ratepayers, not just those who have dogs. So I don't think this is going to work. I did have a question, perhaps I could ask that now, is that it does require 2/3 majority. And with 10 elected members here, it has to be at least 2/3. So that means 7. Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. Look, I don't like this bylaw at all. I think it's really a waste of time. It still has to go through Parliament. I guess Parliament still has the option of deciding whether it will agree to it or not. If anything, I would have said to Parliament, you need to introduce this sort of thing, because then it becomes uniform right across the state, rather than it being sort of a patchwork of rules from one council to another. I'm a bit sad that this is going to cost us money, just like so many other projects that we've got that are just costing money, and sometime or other it's got to stop.
Any further discussion? Councillor Scott.
Yes, I'm afraid I'm going to disagree a bit with my colleague from Mount Compass. The cat situation has worried me for a long, long time, and I think the sooner we can have cats contained, the better the world will be. I can't understand why a person who owns a dog has to go through all the regulations of having the dog, and a person can have a cat that's just basically free range. It just doesn't add up. The serious thing about cats is there's been quite a lot of study done on feral cats, and they can kill up to half a dozen native animals, fauna a day. If they killed one a day, there are 6 million estimated feral cats in Australia, so that's 6 million little native bits and pieces that are being killed a day, and you multiply it by 365. My calculator won't actually quantify that number, and so I know that's not just Alexandrina, it's the whole of Australia, but it just shows you how serious it is, and I see absolutely no reason why a person that has a cat cannot have a fence around their property high enough for the cat not to get out. I don't know why cats need to have special treatment. People are hound farmers because if a sheep gets out on the road, they might hit it with their car or a cow or something like that, and yet cats can roam and do so much environmental damage as well as being a thorough nuisance into the bargain. So however, I cannot quite get my head around number 4, that it's going to cost 150,000. We're talking about an extra person, a vehicle. Can't we have a trailer that we can hook on behind a pool vehicle to whiz round and get the odd stray cat without having to have a dedicated vehicle and a dedicated person? Because there won't be, I mean, there are not a lot of dogs caught, I'm told. So why can't the same staff swing over to the cat situation? Why do we have to have a separate $40,000 vehicle or $50,000 vehicle, whatever they are? So I'm $30,000 or $40,000 vehicle. So those are my thoughts, and I'd like to see it us rein in the budget side of it, but certainly bring on the Act as far as I'm concerned.
Is there any further discussion? Question? Yep.
Yeah, the feral cats were mentioned. Could someone please explain how the bylaw will fix feral cats?
Through the chair, the bylaw won't fix that problem. That's as simple as that. Because, like I said, a feral cat is not what this bylaw is actually going to target. We're going to be targeting pretty much domesticated cats that are allowed to roam. Feral cats are feral cats. They live by their own means. So, in short answer, it's not going to address the feral cat issue.
Any further discussion? Councillor Rebbeck, you'll close the discussion.
Look, just touching on that point, we wouldn't have feral cats if we didn't have domesticated cats. So by fixing the domesticated cat problem, we'll end up having less feral cats. But that does need to be looked at going forward. Cats are important. Cats are beautiful. Cats are fluffy. They're loving and they're adoring pets. They're spiritual animals as far as I'm concerned. And they're amazing animals. But unfortunately, they do hunt wildlife. And we are in an environmentally significant region in the Ramsar wetland, and there are cats along my street, and I hear screaming birds on a nightly basis because they're being caught by cats that have absolutely free rein throughout our entire community. It's time that we, as cat owners, became more responsible for the management of those cats. The cats can still have a wonderful life. They can still go outside. They can be walked. They can have, there's lots and lots of opportunities of how you can keep cats confined and abide by a curfew. The cost at the moment, as we said, we're just looking at getting the bylaw through, and we'll look at the cost through those options in number 4. Again, just like the climate policy, our community support this, and we've spent the money on developing this policy. So to go back and say, all right, well, we've got a good policy now, and a community supporter, but we don't, would be, I think, a little bit, I guess, we've gone through this process, so what message is that sending to our community, who are also here wanting to do a lot for our community and our environment? Just a couple of things with Dr. John Reid. Council should be decisive. Registration is good, but cats should be indoors, and we need to ensure that the funding it's well funded through registrations. Awareness is important, but must be comprehensive. Registrations and containment should be underpin the bylaws, which they are. Enforcement will be necessary, so it will be needed to be funded well going forward. And so going back to Councillor Scott's thing about normal cats, I think there's still, I don't know how many feral cats are, but there's millions of normal cats as well, each going out. And at the moment, a difference between a feral cat and a normal cat in terms of its hunting skills is in terms of what it does hunt is not much different. So thank you for supporting this, and thank you for those that have put in the work to the bylaw.
That closes the discussion. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried.
Could I ask for a division on this, please?
So Councillor Coomans is calling a division. Just, pardon? Yep. Just remind elected members that a division is a new vote. Would those voting in the affirmative please stand? See if Councillor Farrier, Councillor Scott, Councillor Carter, Councillor Stewart, Councillor Keeley, Councillor Rebbeck, Councillor Maidment, Councillor Bradford and Councillor Gardner. Thank you. Would those voting in the negative please stand? Yes, Councillor Coomans. Thank you. It's carried. It's well over 2/3. 8.12 is consultation on the miscellaneous technical enhancement code amendment, and there's a recommendation that we endorse a submission prepared and as part of the consultation. Moved Councillor Maidment. Seconder, Councillor Bradford, Gardner. Any discussion? Councillor Maidment.
Yes, this would be a question for Matt Atkinson. I noticed he was back in the back of the stalls there. The three areas of concern listed here of particular interest to me is the taking the development out of the restricted development pathway, and putting that back into local government or council's hands. So how, could you give us an example of where that might have be appropriate and where it could have been used in the past to solve a few issues before they arose?
Thanks. Through the Chair, I can give you an operational perspective on some of those implications, but the actual code amendment and the like, it's Sally's team that generally looks after all of that. But in terms of the restricted development pathways, the intent, as I understand it from the department, is that there's enough policy context within the document that they don't need to be the authority. One of the key things for a restricted development pathway is it means that the local Fleurieu Regional Assessment Panel will no longer be the authority and the State Commission Assessment Panel becomes the authority. I think what they've found over a period of time is that they're assessing a lot of development applications that they didn't think that they were, so they're looking at pushing it back to the local authority. The concern we've got in relation to that is that some of the landowners will see that as the door being slightly ajar, in that perhaps we can have another look at obtaining approval for dwellings on sites in Currency Creek, for instance, where there's a limited dwelling overlay. So there are some unintended consequences, we think.
Thanks, Matt. Any further discussion? So put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. Thanks, Matt. 8.13 is the Flying Fish Café, development application 22024147. There's a recommendation there with 2 dot points. Move Councillor Gardner. Seconder. Councillor Farrier. Any discussion? It's a good thing. Councillor Rebbeck.
My only concern with this is that it's being done in peak period. Is it going to take up car parking space? Because it's really difficult to get down to that beach and find a park without that taking up car parking space as well.
So through the Chair, just to confirm, it's on the lawned side of the building, so it won't be occupying car parking space.
Any further discussion? Put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. Thanks, Elizabeth. 8.14 is the Murray River Lakes and Coorong Tourism Alliance. It's a 2-month extension of the 2021-22 funding agreement, and there's a recommendation there with 2 dot points. Moved Councillor Gardner. Seconder, Councillor Bradford. Any discussion? It's only an extension for 2 months. No, to put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. 8.15 is the Murray-Darling Association's 78th National Conference and Annual General Meeting. There is a recommendation there that basically we approve Councillor Rebbeck and Councillor Scott to attend that as they've done in the past. Councillor Scott.
I need to declare a conflict of interest here. I think that I'm actually one of the subjects that's going or potentially going. So I just advise that whether I need to leave the chamber or not is up to governance.
It'd be a perceived conflict of interest, but you just advise us how you're going to handle that. So what are you going to do?
I'm happy to stay in the chamber then.
Are you going? You have to tell me you're going to stay in the chamber. Are you going to engage in the debate, and are you going to vote?
No.
Councillor Rebbeck.
I also have a perceived conflict of interest. I'll stay in the chamber, but I won't vote.
Thank you. So that sorts that out. Is it Councillor Stewart moving it? Councillor Farrier, you're seconding it? Any discussion? Councillor Carter.
I have just a slight concern. How does this affect it? I understand Councillor Rebbeck's not going to stand again, and this meeting's in October, and Councillor Scott is playing his chances for the next term of council.
Well, two things. Number one, the meeting is in September.
Sorry, September.
And we haven't had, and nominations haven't opened yet, so you can't determine whether anybody's standing or not. It's inappropriate to determine whether a person is or is not going to stand at this stage.
Sorry, I'm just going on what people have told me.
So you can disregard that. Councillor Gardner?
I'm very happy that these people would be going to the Murray-Darling Association's National Conference, but I really would like to know whether we'll get a decent report when they come back. I think that's going to be actually very important. Thank you.
I think from memory we got a good report last time, and we also do get the detailed report. We get circularised all the detail, the minutes and everything of the meeting. Councillor Coomans, did you?
Yeah, that's the question I was going to ask as well, because it's something that's very important, that if elected members attend conferences, what have you, we need reports from each of them to let us know what their learnings and things were. But I was also going to ask that the CEO is also going, and only you're not going now. Oh, okay, well, I've written the report that you were, but in my report anyway, it seemed to indicate, and only two of the delegates can vote, but if he's not going, then the two that are going will both be voting, so yeah, I'm happy with that.
Any further discussion? No, so I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. 8.16 is the outcomes of an investigation to establish a Section 41 committee for the Clayton Bay foreshore area, and there's a recommendation there with 3 dot points. Councillor Bradford, you moving that? Wish to speak to it?
So I thank the staff for the comprehensive report for this, but I'm certainly moving that we don't proceed to establish a Clayton Bay Foreshore Precinct Committee under Section 41. The reasons for this are that I believe that Clayton Bay is one of the most engaged communities in Alexandrina. The Clayton Bay Community Association and the Clayton Bay Nursery and Environment Group have been managing and caring for the community hall, community plantings, community garden, foreshore and each other for many years. Both have been effective partners with Alexandrina in the delivery of the Foreshore Masterplan. And the Clayton Bay Foreshore Masterplan was endorsed by Council on the 15th of June 2015, and it's guided Council's management and maintenance of the Clayton Bay Foreshore Reserve for 10 years up to 2025. And the master plan was developed in partnership with the Clayton Bay community, and that's the key point really, is that this community feels well consulted with. After all, they are one of the few villages in Alexandrina that can get 100 people to attend a village conversation and over 100 people to input into their strategic planning events, like for the foreshore master plan, or to have a discussion about future directions for the community, such as how to become a dark sky site. That community is engaged, it provides input, and it already has a master plan for the foreshore. And so in this instance, we need to let that community, which is so involved, to continue to do the things that they do and be as involved as they are. Putting in place a Section 41 committee would disempower that community, which has such strength, and also devalue the work that they do. This community certainly has a deep knowledge of their environment, and through their involvement in community consultations constantly inputs and contributes. So, so with the Clayton Bay Foreshore Master Plan in place, already, the work is already being done. The president of the Clayton Bay Community Association said to me, just get on, we've provided all our input, you know what we think and the directions that we want to go. So her suggestion was that council just get on and make the decisions.
So would you have a seconder for that? Councillor Scott, sorry. Any further discussion? No, I think Councillor Bradford said it well. It's an amazing community down there. They are really, really fantastic. They're very proactive. We had a regenerative agriculture forum down there on Saturday that Councillor Gardner and I went to, and it's the biggest turn-up of people, both primary producers and just general landowners, I've ever seen come to such a forum. It was fantastic, really, really good to see, and that's just what they're like, everything they do. And I commend them. They're a lovely community to deal with. They run that little community nursery and revegetation, re-environment group, and they're there every week. They're just doing it. Brilliant. So I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. (8.17) is the Community Donation Fund. It's a small falls festival at Clayton Bay, and their recommendation there is with their request. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Bradford and Councillor Gardner seconding it. Is any discussion? Not, I'll put the recommendation. Oh, Councillor Gardner.
Just want to endorse what you've said, because this is an amazing little community, and from what my understanding of it is that most of the community is very much joined together.
I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. 8.18 is the recommendation for the appointment of an independent board member to the Florio Regional Aquatic Centre, and there is a recommendation there. Moved, Councillor Gardner.
Yes, may I speak?
Yep.
I have met Vicky Tomlinson, and she is a very worthy board member, I'm sure.
Second to Councillor Keeley. Any further discussion? She's certainly very well qualified. If not, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. 8.19 is the Commonwealth Infrastructure Investment Black Spot Program. It's the 9 Mile Roads, and it's an authorisation to sign and seal the deal for that funding. Move, Councillor Scott. Second to Councillor Maidment. Any discussion? Put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. 8.20 is the unsolicited proposal policy. And there's a recommendation there with 2 dot points. Is there a mover for that? Move, Councillor Rebbeck. Is there a seconder? Councillor Keeley. Is there any discussion? No, so I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. (8.21) is the determination to display local government election signage, and there's a recommendation there before you. Moved, Councillor Bradford. Seconded, Councillor Farrier. Is any discussion? Put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? It's carried. They didn't quite get the legislation right, unfortunately, on the signage when they did the reform bill. I guess they'll look at it. 8.22 is the revocation of council's building and swimming pool inspection policy, and there's a recommendation there before you. Move, Councillor Maidment. Seconder, Councillor Carter. Any discussion? No, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? Anyone against? No, that's carried unanimously. 8.23 is authorisation under the Road Traffic Act of 1961, and there is a recommendation there. Move, Councillor Gardner. Seconder, Councillor Farrier. Any discussion? Something we have to do. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. 8.24 is the Chief Executive Officer's report, and there is a recommendation that the report be received. Moved, Councillor Keeley. Seconder, Councillor Carter. Is there any discussion or questions of Nigel regarding his report? No, so I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. Item 9 is elected members' reports. 9.1 is the Mayor's report. There's a recommendation that that report be received. Move, Councillor Carter. Seconder, Councillor Keeley, sorry. Any discussion or questions of my report? If not, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. 9.2 is elected members' report. We have a report from Councillor Gardner. Can we move that we accept that report? Move, Councillor Rebbeck. Second to Councillor Maidment. Are there any verbal updates from elected members they would wish to include? No. So I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Thanks.
I did have my hand up for verbal updates. Sorry, I know it's late in the evening. Just wanted to comment on the Murray-Darling Association meeting in September. We've had some 8 meetings on top of the ordinary meetings and executive meetings with formulating motions that we take to the national conference. And so they've been worked through, and then we also have an interregional meeting coming up on the 6th of September prior to that. So there's a lot of work that goes into pre-attending these conferences, and advocacy around the fact that the 450 gigalitres has not yet been achieved through the Murray-Darling Basin Plan for South Australia and for our environment, and that is one of the biggest things that we'll be focusing on through our motions, but also at the national conference, advocating for how we will achieve that 450 gigalitres, and that New South Wales has not implemented its water saving plans, only 3 of some 15, and that we are advocating for the Murray-Darling Basin Authority to now implement those plans or develop and implement those plans on behalf of New South Wales. So, thank you.
Any further updates from anybody? If not, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. 9.4 is a code of conduct determination. It's a referral from the Ombudsman of South Australia, and it regards Councillor Lewis. Councillor Keeley, you moving that?
Yes, Your Worship, I'm...
Sorry, hang on. I might have missed one. Sorry, we'll start again. Sorry about that. So 9.3, again, is a code of conduct determination. It's a public interest disclosure item regarding Councillor Lewis. There's a recommendation there with 3 dot points. So Councillor Keeley, you're moving it. Councillor Scott, you're seconding it. Do you want to speak to it, do you? Oh, sorry, Carter, sorry. I just saw it out the corner of my eye. Councillor, what?
Yeah.
I mean,
Your Worship, yes, I'd like to speak. Look, I'm moving recommendations as outlined on pages 140 and 141. There were 3 points there. Look, we heard earlier that we've spent $150,000 on codes of conduct. The previous term, I don't think there was anything. I just find it unbelievable that we can spend that sort of money, and here we are, there's more codes of conduct. In the past, we've been fairly lenient and just moving the first part, that is, we receive a note report. We're beyond that now. I know that we're nearly the end of our term. We have to make a stand. This is outrageous, and it's just intolerable that we spend this money, hard-earned money of our ratepayers, to find out that people, councillors, in this case Councillor Bronwyn Lewis, whose name appears in many of these codes of conduct, is costing the council a lot of money to come to a determination. And I think these findings are fair and they're adequate, and I think that it is appropriate that these are indeed approved and conveyed to Councillor Bronwyn Lewis, and hopefully these might be the last ones, but there's still a month to go. So I rest at that moment.
Is there any further discussion? Councillor Coomans.
Yeah, it's funny how $150,000 we've spent over the last 4 years on these codes of conducts, and there are many, many other councils who handle it in a totally different way that costs them nothing. So, you know, if you want to criticise anyone, I think we should criticise a system that allows this to happen, that we spend this sort of money. And now that 150 probably doesn't include the $8,200 that the lawyer is going to cost us. I have a different view in terms of what happens in this place. And quite often we have a vote on a motion, and it's carried, and someone calls a division. And then we name everyone who votes for it and who votes against it. Under the Code of Conduct rules, it seems that once a vote's taken, then all of us must support it. And I have difficulty with that, great difficulty, because if I vote against something and my name is on the public record as saying I oppose that, then I consider that I have some rights in terms of voicing that to the greater community. In looking at the Local Government Act, I was trying to find sections in that would support some of that, and the one I could find was, as a person elected to the council to represent the interests of the residents and the ratepayers of the council. It doesn't say represent the council to the ratepayers, it really talks about it the other way. And it seems to me that when you're oppose a particular motion of council, that you're doing it on behalf of your residents, and you should be able to go out there and tell them about it and tell them why things happen. To sort of suddenly flip over and make it sound like it's the best thing since sliced cheese, to me is just wrong. I think this policy isn't right at all. In terms of, and I'll say more about the next one, but in terms of this, to me there's no natural justice in the way this was handled, because all we've got is and they call it findings. I don't think that's a finding. I think it's an opinion of a lawyer about this particular case. We haven't heard from the other side. We haven't heard whether there's actually evidentiary statements or witness statements involved in this. I just think this whole thing is wrong. So I'm not going to support this at all. And if the rest of the members feel the same way, then I'm going to foreshadow a motion that says what we normally do with these things, that we receive and note it and no action be taken. That's the best message to anyone that don't bother about codes of conduct, because council is not interested in them unless it's something really serious, and if it is, it probably goes to the Ombudsman anyway, and that we'll continue to note and no action will be taken. I think this is ridiculous.
So is there any further discussion? Councillor Rebbeck.
I'm perplexed by those statements. I think the reason why we've had so many is that we are not holding people account, or only holding some of those. Some people that have had codes of conduct have been held absolute to account and hauled over the coals, yet others that seem to be repeat offenders are not and don't have the same rules apply. Having been on the other end of a public code of conduct that went to Councillor Lewis, and she was found guilty of bullying and harassing myself, and it was let go, it was let's note it and move on, means it's been repeat offences. And there has been investigation of the person that was subject to this, and there has been responses, and I must say it seems to be very similar to the situation that occurred when I was involved. And the reason why it's repeating is because we're not holding accountable, and it's costing us more and more money. It's our responsibility as elected members to take responsibility for our actions, as I've been on the other end of codes of conduct as well, and I have taken account and responsibility and having being held accountable for that. We all make mistakes, none of us are perfect, but if these codes of conduct and policy is in place, it's the only thing we have to hold us accountable for our behaviour. It's time we took it seriously. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councillor Carter.
Thank you. This isn't pleasant at all, this sort of thing, and I'm sorry that it's been going on for such a long time. I think the real problem is that there's no great deterrent when the findings come down to this. There's nothing to, as with this case, there's no real penalty or anything for doing this. So until there's some deterrent built into these, I don't believe that we're going to get some people actually adhering to the rules and the regulations that are put down. We've all voted on codes of conduct that they be enforced. So why kick up when they are enforced? It's just a matter of some people just do what they want to do and don't worry about the consequences, because there are no consequences, and that to me is what the fault is, I think.
Is there any further discussion? Not, Councillor Keeley, do you wish to close the discussion on it, or you're happy with it?
Thank you, Your Honour. Look, Your Worship, sorry. I think it's quite clear, and as mild as these requirements are. I think that's what's available to us, and it's part of the Code of Conduct resolution. They've been well investigated, and there's just too many of them. And it's just outrageous that we're spending so much money. We shouldn't need to do that. People need, and I hope that the next term, people recognise their responsibility. They don't go around talking about things that they shouldn't be talking about, that they understand the protocol and do the right thing. I think it's quite important, in fact, that we take a stand now and point out that this is just wrong. And I recommend to everybody here to vote for this motion. Thank you.
That closes the discussion. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? It's carried.
Division, please.
So Councillor Coomans is calling a division. I just remind elected members that a division is a new vote. Would those voting in the affirmative please stand? I have Councillor Scott, Councillor Carter, Councillor Stewart, Councillor Keeley, Councillor Rebbeck, Councillor Maidment, Councillor Bradford and Councillor Gardner. Would those voting in the negative please stand? I have Councillor Farrier and Councillor Coomans. It is carried. So we move on to 9.4, which is the Code of Conduct Determination, which is a referral from the Ombudsman of South Australia regarding Councillor Bronwyn Lewis. So is there a seconder? Councillor Keeley. Is there a seconder? Councillor Carter again.
Could I raise a point of order first, please?
A point of order, yeah.
Mayor Parks? Yeah. Look, what usually happens when we have these is we allow the accused person to make a statement before council actually considers the matter. Yes, we do. I'm sorry, I disagree with you, Mayor Parks.
If the person's here that wants to make a statement, they ask leave of the chamber to make a statement.
The convention is, in all these previous cases, is that the person who's been accused is allowed to make a statement first. Now, Councillor Lewis is on a leave of absence for one reason or another, and it could be a very sensitive reason why she's not here. And in the normal course of events, she would ask to make a statement. She would then leave the chamber, and the elected members would then consider the matter and come to a conclusion. This is not happening here. So I think, in terms of procedural fairness, this should be deferred until the next time, next month.
Point of order, Your Worship. There's been adequate opportunity to respond. This has been investigated and an outcome, and Councillor Lewis had the opportunity to represent herself to those who were doing this objective and very clear discussion, and she had that opportunity. If she'd chosen to say something, she could have said it here to be in this paper now. And I don't think that's a valid argument. I think we need to proceed with the motion as put. Thank you.
I would like to move a formal motion that the motion now be put.
What's that?
Worship, you haven't decided on the first point of order, and yet here we are going into debates and formal motions. Oh, well, I didn't hear that you didn't have
I didn't make a decision. I wasn't going to make a decision. It was a statement and I referred to Nigel. What we're doing, we just carry on.
I do have a point of order, Mayor Parks.
But I've got a formal motion which has been moved, so that takes precedence over all business.
I think a point of order in this case is quite important because I don't intend to vote on this.
I'll get Vanessa to answer it because I'm not prepared to argue at law on these things.
Can I just explain to you what my point of order would be? Okay. Under the Code of Practice Council meeting procedures, under 18, tabling of information, a member may require the CEO to table any documents of the council relating to a motion that is before a meeting, and the CEO must then table that document within a reasonable time or at a time determined by the presiding member after taking into account the wishes of the meeting. And if the member who has required the tabling indicates that he or she is unwilling to vote on the motion until the documents are tabled, then the matter must not be put to the vote until the documents are tabled. And the documents that I'm referring to are, 1, any witness statements, number 2, the submission made by the lawyer representing Councillor Lewis. That's not in the report at all. And until such time as we see those, then I'm not prepared to vote on this matter. And I think that probably takes precedence over formal motion.
Through the Chair, with regard to the first point of order, the correct part of the meeting procedures is clause 15, which is addresses by members. And that does state, a member may, with leave of the meeting, make a personal explanation. And that's usually the clause that members rely on when they are facing a code of conduct matter. They ask leave of the meeting to make a personal explanation. With regard to the investigation, with the Ombudsman's investigation, which is the matter we're looking at the moment, the witness statements are contained within the final report. The report is redacted. That is in the public domain. The elected members were sent an unredacted copy of the report by elected members portal. The report was finalised before the Council received legal advice from Councillor Lewis's lawyers. The lawyer did not raise any compelling reasons for the matter not to be presented to Council. The procedural fairness is outlined in the document. It was a referral from the Ombudsman relating to a complaint from the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman wrote to Mayor Parkes and requested that the matter be investigated by the Council, and he considered the most appropriate mechanism for that investigation to be the Code of Conduct for elected members. Elected members would be aware that they recently adopted a caretaker policy which states that we will not present Code of Conduct determinations to Council during caretaker period. Any pending Code of Conducts that have not been finalised before we enter caretaker period at 12 noon on the 6th of September will be referred to the next meeting of Council if the elected member who is the subject of the Code of Conduct is re-elected. Procedurally, the presentation of this report is correct and just and has followed the principles of procedural fairness. There are no rights of appeal in the Local Government Act for determinations of codes of conduct for final investigation reports. Councillor Lewis's lawyer has been reminded of this fact, and she has been advised that all appeal rights rest with Ombudsman SA with regards to the final investigation report.
So that, Councillor Stewart. Hang on, so if we've got a formal motion,
Yeah, with that, I'll second the formal motion. Thank you.
Look, I repeat that the full Ombudsman report in relation to this was not tabled. I want to see that.
Through the Chair, the Ombudsman correspondence remains confidential, and the only way to gain permission to view that correspondence would be for you to request permission of the Ombudsman to view the correspondence. The matter is succinctly summarised in the investigation report by Minter Ellison lawyers. They sought permission from the Ombudsman to summarise the matter. The matter's been summarised. There was a Part 3 complaint that went to the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman decided that the matter was better dealt with under Part 2, under the Elected Members Code of Conduct, and investigated by Alexandrina Council as the relevant agency.
So in relation to Councillor Lewis's report, why wasn't that part of the report? She made quite an extensive submission on this.
Through the Chair, Councillor Lewis's responses to Minter Ellison are included within the final report.
They weren't in the attachments.
Councillor Lewis's comments are interspersed throughout the report. I draw your attention to clause 4.2 in particular. It states, Councillor Lewis has admitted after the fact that she shouldn't have said these comments. It is apparent that Councillor Lewis also formed this view at the time, this being evidenced by the fact she told the staff member to disregard the conversation. So Councillor Lewis has addressed each point and her comments are included within the commentary of the report.
Sorry, Mayor Parkes, I'm still not satisfied, so I will not be voting.
And I'll remind you, which is different to this altogether, that you have an obligation to vote and you don't have a choice. So I don't get any pleasure out of doing this up either, but this is one that involves the Ombudsman, so it's, you know, just quite frankly had enough of them all. So it's a formal motion, that it be put. So I will put the formal, so I'm going to put the formal motion first. So there's the formal motion that it be put. And those in favour? Against? That's carried. So now I will put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? Against? Councillor Coomans, you are required by law to vote.
I guess I stand by what I said before, that I'm not satisfied that all of the material that should have been tabled as part of the report has been provided, in which case I say again that clause 18 of the procedures allows me not to vote at all, and I'm using that clause 18.
Vanessa tells me everything's been tabled, so there is a requirement to vote. Sorry, I don't make the rules, it's just in there.
Sorry, I'm not convinced that I've got all the information I need to make a decision, so okay. I'm going to use clause 18.
Yep, so that's it. So if you refuse to vote, it'll be noted in the minutes that you refuse to vote, and it will be noted in the report that goes back to the Ombudsman's office. The item is carried.
Division?
So Councillor Keeley's calling a division. I'll remind elected members that a division is a new vote. Would those voting in the affirmative please stand? So Councillor Scott, Councillor Carter, Councillor Stewart, Councillor Keeley, Councillor Rebbeck, Councillor Maidment, Councillor Bradford and Councillor Gardner. Thank you. Would those voting in the negative please stand? It's Councillor Farrier, and it be noted again that Councillor Coomans did not vote. It's carried. So item 10 is confidential reports.
South Coast Television, your community, your voice.